Hello and good evening and welcome to People and Politics, which comes to you tonight from Cardiff. You will, I sincerely trust, recall that recently we visited Scotland to discuss devolution with an audience drawn from all walks of life. On that occasion, we promised that as soon as possible, we would repeat the experiment in Wales. So here we are. However, the man who said that a week is a long time in politics knew what he was talking about in that respect, at least. In the space of the last 7 days, the British political scene has been transformed by the alliance between Mr. Steele's Liberals and the government. Political pundits are still wrestling with the implications of that unlikely coupling. Some, nitpicking their way through the small print of the agreement, have resolutely closed their minds to the thought that something quite unique may have occurred. That for the first time in post-war Britain, two political parties have stopped the brickbats and joined in a common exercise in survival. Nervously, hesitantly, the Labour Party has begun to exorcise the ghost of Ramsay MacDonald. But the marriage has been made in Westminster. Tonight, for the first time, with the opportunity to hear the views of the rank-and-file party workers and ordinary people. How do the miners of South Wales react to Mr. Steele's declaration that socialism is muzzled by the pact? In the land where everyone's father knew Lloyd George, do the Liberals feel threatened by Big Brother Jim? Do Welsh Tories, and I'm assured they do exist, wish that Mrs. Thatcher had gone a-wooing herself? Does the pact aid or hinder the devolution cause? That's what we hope to find out tonight. To help me in my task, I have on the platform Winston Roddick of the Liberal Party, David Williams of Plaid Cymru, Michael Roberts of the Conservative Party, and Alan Williams of the Labour Party. But it is an audience show, and let's start with the audience. And let me start with the question, the audience reaction to the deal that was done beginning of last week or the middle of last week between the Liberal Party and the government. Let me start with Gareth Miles of Plaid Cymru. Mr. Miles.
Well, I welcome this development, this collaboration between two parties which have betrayed and misled Wales for so long. They've been such important vehicles of British nationalism in Welsh life. I welcome this exercise in survival, as you say, because it shows that they're well on the way now, well on the slippery slope, to use their phrase, towards complete moral and political bankruptcy and disintegration.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Lysett in the front row here.
Well, my first reaction was disappointment over the Labour-Liberal arrangement, I think Mr. Callaghan likes to call it, which has deprived the people of this country of the chance to express through the polls their feeling as to what government they would wish to have. Secondly, I feel a great sorrow for the Parliamentary Liberal Party because I think Mr. Steele has put them in the position of the young lady from Niger who went for a ride on a tiger. And you will recall, gentlemen, they came back from the ride with a lady inside and a smile on the face of the tiger. And I think Mr. Callaghan is a very adroit politician, and he will be the one that has the smile on his face eventually.
Thank you very much. Di Francis, may I hear from you, please?
Well, we've got no confidence either in the leadership of the Labour Party or the Liberal Party. They are the leadership of both parties have betrayed the miners in the past. And whether it's a marriage in Westminster, a marriage in Cuba, or a marriage in New York, makes no difference. Fact of the matter is, there won't be one extra miner coming into the coalfields of South Wales next week, where there are 2,000 vacancies and 80,000 unemployed in South Wales. It won't matter one thing as far as the miners are concerned.
Thank you very much. In that case, let me now introduce our platform more formally, and let me start with you, Alan Williams. That's less than unbridled enthusiasm from the audience we hear at the start there.
Well, I think the comments from Blythe are typical of the nonsense we're accustomed to from Blythe, so I don't think we need to comment on it. There was no objective assessment in it. As for Dow, well, Dow and I have known each other for many years, and indeed he is a very valued critic continuously of Labour administrations, and I'm sure we'd all think we were going wrong somewhat if we found we were getting your enthusiastic support, or that you'd mellowed a little.
I differentiated between the Labour Party and Labour leadership.
But I think the point you have to bear in mind, you said there's no value for the miners in this, but I do wish you'd listen to Keith Joseph winding up a speech, winding up in a debate I took part in a couple of weeks ago in the House. I wish you'd listen to Mrs. Thatcher and some of her comments, and you'd realise that you would be operating in a very different economic environment, and that would be disastrous for the miners.
Mr. Roberts.
Well, it's nice to have a Minister of State conceding the first point, that if there had been a general election, there would have been a return of a Tory government.
I don't remember
And that,
even
of
saying
course, well, he was talking about the people you'd have to face in government if they were running the coal mines. But what of course, the implication was quite clear.
No, he didn't say
but
that, did he?
The implication
Now, to be fair
was
to him, now,
quite
he didn't
clear.
say that.
Di Francis,
The-
I will come back to the audience.
Presumably, Mr. Francis knows the word implication. The implication of what he says was perfectly clear. But of course it's of value. This is the whole point of the arrangement. It's not an alliance. It is an arrangement. It is an arrangement by a party which wants to stay in government with a party which knows that if it did go to the polls, the Liberals must at least know that. Every indication is the Liberals would have been slaughtered. Now, I'd have had so much more sympathy with the Liberals if I thought for one moment that they'd done it in the interests of what you described as an alliance. But they did it primarily to save their 13 parliamentary seats. And I don't think the electorate's going to forgive them for that.
All right, I'll come back to the audience in a minute, but let me go round the platform at this stage. Daffyd Williams.
Well, as far as we're concerned, we don't mind what any of the London parties do, what arrangements they make between themselves, because all of them are equally as much to blame for our plight here in Wales. As far as we are concerned as a national party, there was no question of our being able to vote anything else than we did the other night. As far as we are concerned, the Labour Party has betrayed Wales. It has doubled unemployment. It has cut vital public spending while allowing arms spending to go ahead. It's betrayed people who've suffered pneumoconiosis. It's betrayed us on the water equalisation bill. And as a final insult, its own MPs have betrayed us on the promise for Welsh Assembly. There is no question of our being able to support them at all. We've got no confidence in the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or the Liberal Party. What counts is the number of nationalist MPs in Westminster from Wales and Scotland.
Thank you very much. Winston Roddick, the man who's been off for a ride on the Tiger. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm very surprised to hear David Williams on behalf of Plaid saying that it has no confidence in the Labour Party and the Labour government, because the nationalists at Westminster have been sustaining this government in power for a very long time, because it has been voting for it on every single occasion.
We voted against
except
on the last
for,
vote of confidence.
well, you've had your opportunity, allow others now. Now, it mustn't therefore be seen to criticise those who, for the good of the country, have decided to support this particular government. Now, let me explain quite clearly the reasons why the Liberal Party entered into this arrangement with the Labour government and with the Prime Minister. The Liberal Party could see that it was not in the interest of the country to have an election at the present time. Secondly, if there was a possibility, and I put it no higher than that the Labour government would be replaced by a Tory government, that could only spell out catastrophe, because the Conservative Party had no sense of direction, and more important of all, it had no economic policy at all. Therefore, if this arrangement has been struck, it's been struck in part, and I say in part only, because the Conservatives were unable to put before the country a constructive alternative. And the greatest evidence of that is that not on one single sentence during the debate in the House of Commons did Margaret Thatcher advance a single constructive alternative proposal.
Okay.
That is why we have the pact, or the arrangement.
Let me go back to the all right. Let me go back to the audience now, and what I'd like particularly is to hear at this stage of the discussion, if I may, from Labour Party and Liberal Party supporters in particular, about how they in particular think the pact will work and what they think of its significance, and whether they believe it is simply an election, an alliance in Westminster for a temporary motive and time, or whether they also believe that in fact it will grow out into something rather more significant. So I'd like people to address their minds slightly to that if they could. Mr. Davis, you were indicating you wanted to speak.
Yes. I'd like to say that as far as the Trade Union Congress are concerned for Wales, that we are very happy that there is still a Labour government, because the thought of a Margaret Thatcher Tory government is too appalling to contemplate. I want to say this, that there has been an air of hypocrisy from the speakers on the platform, because the vote of confidence in the government last week was not a vote of confidence in the government's record. In fact, it was a technical motion that was put forward dealing with the cuts in public expenditure. And the Tories put that motion forward knowing full well what the content of debate was. And if they had got in, or if they had defeated the Labour government, the cuts in public expenditure would have been the most savage we would have known in the history of this country.
Mr. Davis, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Davis. May I ask you, as a trade unionist, however, whether in fact you are worried that the government's part of the social contract, which is so important, may be weakened or watered down as a result of an alliance with the Liberal Party, which has never made any secret of the fact that it's not particularly fond of large conglomerates of any sort, and they include the trade union movement in this, of wielding vast amount of power in the land.
As far as the social contract is concerned, the trade union movement entered into this voluntary with the Labour government and have accepted voluntary wage restraint over a number of years. We expected the government to carry out socialist measures as part of their bargain of the social contract. This has not been done. And I think basically this is the reason why the Labour government has found themselves in the position they are today, that they have not carried out the socialist measures which the rank and file of the trade union movement and Labour Party wanted. But that is no excuse for a Tory government placing a vote of no confidence. It's no reason why David William will say that the Labour Party hasn't got a record that is worthy of support. Because when the Welsh nationalists supported the Tories in this vote of no confidence, they knew full well that their greatest aspiration for devolution for Wales, they were supporting a party that had declared categorically that under no circumstances would there be devolution for Wales.
I'll have to move on for you, Mr. Davis, and I will ask everybody, and I'm not in any way attacking Mr. Davis for this, but I will ask everybody to try and keep their points as short as possible, and that means me as well. Who wanted to speak next? Gentleman in the front row, that's Mr. Benedict, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, I would just like to say that I think the average person who is a member of the Labour Party or a member of the Liberal Party, probably a considerable number of members of the Conservative Party also, are extremely relieved that we may have at last a centre coalition in politics. And this is something where my colleague on the right, Francis, of course, will probably scratch my eyes out or something similar.
I wouldn't do that to you.
But it is something which we sincerely hope, and certainly in industry we hope so, that we will take the cat and mouse game away from politics and talk on something similar to what has happened in German politics, with a similar realignment between the FDP and SDP, with a great success for Germany.
Mr. Benedict, may I take that up straight away? That point, Mr. Moore, you were shaking your head when he was saying that. Do you look at this alliance much more as an alliance of convenience rather than as any real change in British politics?
Yes, that's the point I wanted to come in on. I think we have got to keep in some context exactly what this deal is that people talk about. There is not much in the deal. We for days before the debate, had a lot of conjecture. Are you saying the Liberals
were cheated in that case?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm a member of the Labour Party. For days before, we read in the newspaper of claims and counterclaims that were going to appear within the deal. Now, since that time, I have looked at the deal, and really all it is a recognition that we are a minority government, and as a minority party, we have to take other people's views into account. Yeah. Now, nobody should, if they're Democrats, disagree with that. Yeah. That's as far as it goes.
Let's hear from a Liberal on that too. Mr. Livesey, you were waiting to come in. I was going to go to your colleague, Mr. Lewis, at the back. I'll go to Mr. Livesey first, in fact.
Mr. Chairman, a very courageous decision has been taken by the Liberal Party in the last week. After all, we've got to face politics fully in the face, and I think that if the Liberal Party hadn't taken a decision to do what it has done in the past week, the net result would have been a disaster. First of all, there are three issues, I think, about which the Labour Party and the Liberal Party can agree in government over the next period of time. These are that something, first of all, has got to be done about the economy. We need phase 3 of the pay policy, and I think this is absolutely vital. Secondly, we will see, hopefully, elections to the European Parliament coming along, and as a Liberal, I trust these will be held under proportional representation. And thirdly, we can see now the practical possibility of devolution taking place.
Do you see more than that, though, in any way, Mr. Livesey? Do you see the chance of you and Mr. Moore there lying down in the one political bed for any longer period than the 6 months?
I think, Mr. Gardiner, that the situation is this, that each party must have its own self-respect, and this must not be devalued in politics as we find them in this country today. This gives hope to the broad mass of reasonable people in this country that they at last can see a way through from the political wilderness that other parties and other people have taken us over the last 25 years. Now let's give it a chance. That's what I'm saying. We'll see how it goes.
Mr. Moore looked as if I'd threatened him with rape with that thought. But can I come to Mr. Davis behind you, a lifelong supporter of the Labour Party, I feel. Mr. Davis, how do you feel about it all?
Mr. Chairman, the ideal situation to what happened last week would have been that there would have been an election and that the Labour government would have returned with a handsome majority.
Never.
That's the ideal situation. But of course, we have in this country...
unbiased way, I take it.
I used to belong to an organisation which said, I promise to be candid but not impartial.
Mr. Davis, may I ask you to address your mind to one particular point? With respect, you remember Ramsay MacDonald rather more clearly than I do. Do you fear in any way that this government is about to tread the path that Ramsay MacDonald and his colleagues trod?
No. There's a logic of events as well as behaviour of politicians, you know, and that's why I'd like to see the Labour government go back in. But as we have, there used to be a phrase in the First World War, PBI, poor bloody infantry, who are to, you know, come to the rescue always after the mistakes of generals. There's a PBE as well, which can be translated as poor British electorate. And they have a habit, after the Tory governments have got us into difficulties, of supporting...
Oh, rubbish.
All right. They have a habit, I'll repeat it, you can shout rubbish again then. They have a habit, after Tory governments have got us into messes...
Absolute rubbish.
And
all right, let Mr. Davis finish, please.
There's 3 tries for a Welshman, so I'll say it again. After Tory governments have got the country into difficulties, and Labour governments, as has been the case now, via the social contract, it's the working class that's solving this problem. They're solving this problem. The electorate, for some strange reason, vote Tory. And we have a situation like what we had when Mr. Macmillan had 13 years of Tory government after the Labour government had gotten...
I'm going to have to stop you there. I've got a Conservative right... I'm sorry. I've got a Conservative right beside you, and I think I'd better hear from a Conservative. I would honestly like this debate and this discussion to centre itself on the alliance and on aspects of the alliance, rather than alleged wasted 13 years and alleged wasted other years. We could let us take it for granted that all Conservatives here believe a Conservative government be a good idea, and all Labour Party supporters here believe that a Labour government is a good idea. May I hear from you, Mr. Lashon?
Yes, indeed, sir. In fact, the British electorate, the moderate centre that we've been hearing about, have just, by a really dirty piece of political manoeuvring and double dealing in the House of Commons, have just been denied the chance to throw out the most socialist government we've yet seen in this country. And it has been done simply in order to keep the socialists in power, because they know that every opinion poll shows they would be thrown out. And it has been done because there are 13 frightened Liberals who knew that they would be decimated in an election. And the electorate has been denied the opportunity which they should now have to get rid of this gang from the House of Commons.
All right, like a very unfrightened Liberal up there,
Yes,
Mrs. Murphy, I
Mr.
think.
Gardner,
Yes.
as one Liberal and a fervent supporter of the Liberal Party, can I just point out, Mr. Gardner, that you've got here representatives from all the political parties, and the thing that characterises this kind of discussion is the predictability of people's responses. One can forecast with a considerable degree of accuracy how everyone is going to speak here, and I think the important thing about this deal, this pact, this arrangement, call it what you like, is that it is an innovation in politics, and there have been far too few recently. The prospect of another hung election, I think, would drive more and more people to stay at home. The electorate is becoming cynical about politicians because they are so predictable, and it's possible, as David Steele says, he's asked people not to make snap judgments. The thing about politicians is that they have to make snap judgments. They have to seem to be reacting to everything.
Mrs. Murphy, again, may I then put this point to you? Do you see this deal as, in fact, a seed from which a larger alliance could grow? Do you envisage the day when perhaps you and a Labour Party locally will work together locally on issues and perhaps even have common candidates?
It's possible, Mr. Gardner. You see, you refer to lying down in the same bed, whether it's the young lady who lies down in the same bed or goes for a ride on a tiger. It's possible that she might come back with a smile on her face. It's been known after a sally into the woods, you see. So David Steele has asked the electorate to wait and see, and like Asquith, I'm going to wait and see.
Mr. Jones, I think, is waiting to speak, and then I'll come onto the platform.
Yes. Mrs. Murphy and I are old adversaries, and I know how she has hated the Labour Party in her own constituency for years and years and years. She has got on with the Conservatives. She at least has talked to us. She has never talked to the Socialists until now at all. And to make out that there's some sort of nice relationship between them now is real hypocrisy as far as the Liberals are concerned. And I'll go further than that. If you look at the situation of the Liberals now, and boys, we all know it here, if the Liberals had to go to the country now, only Mr. Hewson in Wales probably would retain his Liberal seat. And as far as in Britain is concerned, Mr. Grimmond and Mr. Steele would be the only other two, in fact, to retain them.
Okay,
and
well,
the Liberals know that.
Yeah.
They're like a kamikaze pilot at the moment, heading for destruction. It's absolutely true.
Mr. Jenkins beside you, and then the young lady down there, and then I'll come to the platform. Mr. Jenkins.
Mrs. Murphy has referred to the predictability of what would be said here today, and I think she's quite right, you know. But it seems to me there are too many people who are thinking about the saving of seats, of saving of a party, rather than the saving of the country, and that's what we should be turning our minds to.
Right.
And I think what happened in Parliament this week is exactly that. It saved the country. Didn't the whole financial system of this country shudder to its foundations at the very thought of Margaret Thatcher taking the control of this country?
Not at all.
Absolutely.
Mr. Jenkins, do your Labour Party instincts say to you this is something that might grow and develop, or it's something, it's a life belt that we want to get rid of as quickly as we step onto dry land?
Well, I think it's a temporary arrangement.
Well, good,
as much as I think it's a temporary arrangement, the mixed economy, I think that's got to go as well. But this is an arrangement to keep the Labour government in power at the moment, and as a consequence, keep the country afloat.
That's all it is. That's all it is.
All right, let me come to the platform. Mr. Roddick, isn't that rather a cynical view of it, and doesn't much of what has been said up to now rather bear out the words of the critics who do suggest that the Liberals are being taken for a ride, and perhaps not a very long ride?
No. What characterises the Tory contribution to this debate is the absence of constructive proposals and the presence of one cliché after another. What is very telling about this particular arrangement is this. When you consider that the Labour Party are supported in Parliament by about 11 million votes, the Liberal 13 are supported in Parliament by 5.5 million votes. And therefore, between them, they represent a very wide cross-section of the public, and it's only right that those two parties should try to come to some accommodation as that gentleman at the back said a moment ago, for the benefit of the country as a whole. And there is...
But that gentleman at the back also doesn't see it, I think, if I understood him correctly, as something that will last very long. Do you think he's wrong to think that?
Well, I can't say whether it's going to last a particular length of time. The arrangement between the Liberal Party and the government is this, that there will be regular and periodical discussion between the two on each proposal which the government wishes to put through Parliament. If the Liberal Party comes to the view that it can no longer support the arrangement, it will withdraw that support. And to a certain extent, the Labour government is therefore in a period of probation, subject to the supervision of the Liberals. And the Liberals have never been more effective.
All right, I think
but you're asking me how long the arrangement is going to last. Well, I cannot tell you. For the good of the country, I certainly hope it will last till the end of the present session, and preferably a little while longer.
Mr. Williams, are you as cynical as some of your supporters seem to be about this deal?
No, I think the important thing is that Mrs. Murphy may be right in some of the points she was making, but I think the interesting part about this evening and the last week has been not to look at the predictable things that perhaps we are, in our party positions, bound to say. It's to look at the less predictable. For example, we have here Mr. Benedict from the CBI. He actually welcomed the decision and welcomed the continuation of the government. If you look at the stock exchange on the Monday, as has been alluded to, it was remarkable that £1,000 million was written off share values when it was thought that Mrs. Thatcher might become a Prime Minister. Now, why did that happen? It happened because the business people of this world, as well as the Liberals and the Labour Party, know very well we've got to get the next round of the social contract. We've got to get results from the May summit, and we want the budget that Dennis Healey has been preparing for. And I think that there's been a surprising vote of confidence from non-political sources in the deal which has been arrived at.
Okay, I'm going to have to take a break in a moment. I must ask you for quite quick points, Mr. Roberts.
May I then try and answer the question you put? I think everyone here will admit that there must be some element of survival in the deal that was made. But there is the point raised, and it's a very important one. Can this mean, and this is the point you've made, and nobody's tried to answer it, can this mean a realignment in British politics? I did notice, so obvious, they didn't attempt to. But it possibly could. But it can only do it at a certain price. And that price would be for a liberal and moderate Labour group to get together and the splitting of the Labour Party. Now, quite frankly, I'd welcome that. I would think that is a splendid move. I don't expect members of the Labour Party to welcome it. I don't think they would allow it. And it is precisely because that is the price of that sort of realignment, that sort of coalition, that it is most unlikely to come about. That there is an element that is desirable in it, I can quite clearly see. And you might find, in those circumstances, you may well find that one or two members of the Conservative Party would say, well, no, this is an attractive proposition. But the Labour Party cannot exist in its present form and create that sort of new alignment. And that is why I believe that in October of this year, the Liberal Party will come face to face with a politician, and it'll be a general election.
Can I take a quick I'm sorry, I must take a quick point from Mr. Williams on the platform, who hasn't spoken for a long time.
I don't think that this deal is the last of the sort we're going to see, because Westminster itself is becoming unstable. I don't think that the Parliament of Westminster is going to remain for more than 5 years untouched as it is now. I think what counts is not whether it's Jim Callaghan's pink Tory government or Margaret Thatcher's blue Tory government propped up by David Steele Liberals. I don't think that counts. What counts is the strength of the Scots Nationalists and the Welsh Nationalists. And if you look at the pressure which has come from Scotland in recent years, what has caused it? What has caused it? What has caused them to shake in their shoes? It hasn't been what Labour and Liberal and Tory politicians have been saying in Scotland. It is the strength of the organised national movement in that country. And we are growing in the same way in Wales, and we will succeed to the same extent that we grow at the same pace as Scotland.
Right. Thank you very much. In fact, it is in the second half of the programme I will look rather more closely at the growth of nationalism in Wales and of attitudes of people in the audience to the whole devolution question. Why don't you join us in a moment?